I think we can get started. Welcome, everybody. Welcome tonight to the second workshop that we're having this summer, sponsored by the School of Business here at Kendall College. This is our second, as I said, our second workshop this summer. When we were planning this, a couple weeks or a couple months ago, actually, both my dean, Dean Cousins, as well as my other colleague here in the School of Business, Aurora Reinke, were given the opportunity to present some topical issues that might bring folks together to reminisce, I don't know if reminisce is the right word, or discuss things of topical interest. And so one of the things that we talked about was financial planning and the turbulent nature of the markets. And so we thought that this might be a natural fit for such an event. So here we are. Again, I should remind everybody that this is presented by the School of Business here at Kendall College. As some of you may know, we are maybe the smallest of the colleges here, or the schools at Kendall College, but we also, I think, have a lot of good things going on. And there's many brochures at the tables, and both my colleague Aurora and I, as well as Dean Cousins, would love to tell you our story here tonight. So at some point, maybe you can all stop by, and we'd like to share some more with you about that. Some of my students are also sitting here in the audience tonight. It's amazing what the threat of extra credit will do, that will bring students out. And so, but nevertheless, we've been studying some of these types of things in our personal financial planning course. So this will be really interesting so that they can hear some of these things right from the expert's advice. So that's pretty cool. The other thing I have to do, since I do this with everybody that I meet, I have to provide a shameless plug to our dining room downstairs on the third floor. If you have not visited our dining room downstairs, you must do so. It's Michelin rated downstairs, and so it's fine dining presented by our students and our chefs here at Kendall College. So you definitely have to check that out sometime. So again, I say it's a shameless plug, but that's what it is. Our topic again tonight is financial planning in turbulent financial or economic times. Since I'm the guy that teaches economics and finance and accounting here, I just thought that we have to talk about this. This is one of those elephants that's in the room, and it's just better to deal with it head on. And I think some of these folks here have got some absolutely fantastic stories and some interesting ideas and advice that you might want to think about. Now, before teaching at Kendall College, I had a 30-year career as a CPA and a banker. And while I always had a passion for teaching and training, in 2008, little did I know that my boss was going to give me that little bit of nudge that I needed to engage in this opportunity, because he indicated that he was going to reorganize and redesign the audit department at the bank that I was working at, and that I was not going to be in that future. And so I got to witness what we now call the Great Recession. At the time, I didn't know that that's what we were calling it, but that's what we were calling it. And I met quite a few individuals during that time in that Great Recession that were struggling with making financial commitments and just basically surviving. And so I learned firsthand during that experience what can happen when you start using some of those savings that you had already earmarked for retirement. You are beginning to use those a little bit early. And so I thought that tonight might be an opportunity to talk about some of that, maybe rebuild some of those things that you might want to be rebuilding, or just take another look at what you've got going on in your economic life. I wanted to share a couple things with you, if I could, to set the stage, and then I've got a couple of other little announcements to make before I introduce our panelists for tonight. But in May 2011, U.S. News and World Report wrote an article that caught my attention and I thought I'd share some of the results of that article that they talked about. The article was entitled 10 Ways That the Recession Has Changed Retirement. And I'm not going to tell you all 10 ways. I just thought I'd tee up a couple of them and just see if, those of you that have got some white hair starting to appear on your head, some of these things might be foremost in front of your mind. Number one, they had indicated in there that they had recently received an AARP Public Policy Institute report, and these were some of the findings. Number one, they were finding that most folks coming out of the recession were spending their retirement savings. In fact, 25% of the Americans 50 years and older had exhausted all of their retirement savings during the recession. I met a lot of guys like that when I was out there. Number two, many Americans were claiming retirement benefits early. In fact, in their survey of over 5,000 individuals, they found that over 1 in 3 of those survey respondents who were unemployed during the recession had elected to claim their retirement benefits early. So I know some of our speakers will talk a little bit about some of that and to tell you what they were finding and what we can do about that if you were one of those people. In addition, number 3, that those individuals that were over 50 who were counting on rising home values to assist in their retirement savings could no longer count on that savings option. In fact, over 1 in 3 of those respondents indicated that that savings option was no longer viable because their home was now underwater. Not in a physical or molecular sense, but in a financial sense. Number 4, many of these individuals, 19% as a matter of fact of the respondents, indicated that they were carrying too much debt, especially credit card debt, into retirement, and 15% of them were behind on their mortgage payments. And lastly, many of these individuals, almost 1 in 2, indicated that they were going to have to work more and longer in retirement, either part-time or just delay retirement, because they did not have a sufficient financial cushion to retire. So they're either going to work longer and delay retirement or work more, actually work in retirement. I tease my wife that part of my retirement funding is a blue smock. And so if I could make it as a greeter at Walmart, that might help me. And so that study was kind of indicating some of that as well. Lastly, there was a UN study that also gets at another issue that I've been telling my class about lately, and that is, it's one of these good news, bad news things. The good news is that the United Nations, in a survey that they did, they found that U.S. males are now living past their 78th birthday. In 1990, many U.S. males were lucky to make it to their 71st birthday, according to the United Nations. And so women are living past their 82nd birthday. Well, they've also found that most of the men that can make it to their 82nd birthday are more than likely to make it to 90. So that's good news for those of us that would like to kind of hang out on the earth a little longer. The bad news is that you're now living past your retirement savings because you were thinking that you weren't going to make it that long, so you were going to party until you're 78 or 80, and what the heck, But now, many Americans are finding that they're living beyond their retirement savings. So, with all of that good news, I thought we would proceed with tonight's program. Now, a couple things I want to remind you about before we do that. Number one, you see some cameras here in the room. So we are podcasting this program tonight so others can look at it later on our website. So if you don't want to be in the field of vision of the cameras, stay behind the cameras, and that way then you can make sure that you're not on the podcast, if you would so elect. In addition, if you do have a question for our panelists, which I'm sure that many of you may, if you could speak up, or I'll try to get this microphone to you so that you can speak up so that we can hear your question on the podcast, so that both the question and the response can be heard into posterity. So that's one thing that I would warn you about. The other is, it's one of those, the legal beagles want me to make sure that I say this here tonight. And I just want to let you know that Kendall College, while providing this forum to you tonight, is not providing any financial advice to you tonight. And while we love our panelists, we're not endorsing their ideas or products. They're here for you to consider, and that if you do have a financial situation that does need a little bit of attention, please seek out your own financial advice and do your necessary homework. But tonight's forum is merely that, just a forum to provide an exchange of ideas. So hopefully now our legal beagles will now can rest, and we can get on with the show. We are so lucky to have these three panelists here tonight. I want to give you a little bit of a clue as to who you're going to be meeting with, and the ideas that they're bringing, and what these fine people do for a living. And I'm going to start with Shireen, and then we'll work our way down the panelists. But I want to really, really thank these panelists for giving up their time tonight to share their ideas with us. Shireen Grollo, who is a CCPS and a CDFA with Lighthouse Financial Group, is here tonight to share her ideas with us. She is a licensed financial planner, a certified college planning specialist, and a certified divorced financial analyst. She specializes in working with families to plan and pay for college. She provides expertise to those families going through a divorce, and creates holistic financial plans for all of life's transitions. She's been affiliated with Lighthouse, which is in her family business, of 26 years, since 2009. So we're really lucky to have Shireen here tonight. She's going to be talking a little bit about organizing your finances, organizing your financial records. Mark Gilbert, in the middle, we're really lucky to have Mark here tonight. He's a principal with Reason Financial Advisors. He has more than 25 years of professional experience in finance and accounting. Prior to joining Reason Financial in 2007 as their principal, he was a financial planning manager and a vice president with the registered investment advisory firm and affiliate of a trust department of a major Chicago bank. From 1997 to 1999, he was an owner and vice president of another fee-only financial planning firm in Northbrook. His professional career includes positions as executive director of a municipal deferred compensation retirement plan, and he covers over 9,000 participants, as well as treasurer and controller of a national and international privately held professional service firm based in Chicago. So, I mean, we're really lucky. I mean, this guy is well sought after by his clients and others, so we're lucky to have him here tonight. Last but not least is Janice Ferris. And she is an enrolled agent with the IRS. Did I get that right? Okay. And she's with the Heartland Group. Janice is a financial advisor with them, where her role is linking individuals and businesses to financial goals with solid financial planning. Before taking her current role with the Heartland Group, she was owner and principal of an accounting and tax firm for 23 years, which taught her, among other things, I imagine, is listening is often the key to finding the appropriate solutions unique to each individual and or their business. Her goal is to provide education as to available options, and she believes that a clear understanding is the foundation to a sound decision. So could you please welcome these individuals here tonight? And without any more waiting, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Shireen, and she's going to tell you all about organizing your financial records. Shireen.
John, thanks so much for the introduction. As he said, my name is Shireen Grollo. I'm part of Lighthouse Financial Group. And what I was asked to talk about tonight is organizing financial documents. So I will definitely talk about that, but I'd kind of like to put it out there that I'd like my segment to be a little bit about organizing what we're going to be talking about tonight as a panel, so kind of the foundation, but also really to really set the foundation for you in setting yourself up for financial success. And as planners and advisors, I know we get a lot of questions, what do I do with this document and all these papers, and do I have to keep them? Do I even have to read them? And so I get it. It's confounding and it can be frustrating. But I'd like to invite you to have a little bit of a mental shift when it comes to talking about this. Most of us don't wake up in the morning and are so excited to organize our papers and file cabinets and things like that. Other than my mother is the only person I know. And so for me, I'd like to give you a little bit of a comparison. If people were to describe me, they'd be like, yeah, Shireen, they'd probably say a lot of things about me, but something that they might say is that I'm a runner. But I don't consider myself a runner in the same sense that I consider other people runners, because I think other runners actually like running, whereas I don't. But, so I'm not committed to what I consider a painful experience of running. What I'm committed to is my health, my fitness, endorphins, energy, and so that's why I go to the gym. And so I kind of encourage you to think of the same thing. What is it that organizing your documents and your finances, what can that do for you personally? What can it do for you mentally? And so I'm not asking you to like anything that we're going to be talking about, but I am asking you to look at what you're committed to around your finances, and then whether it's organization or more planning becomes a little bit more appealing. So that's step one. Let's have a little bit of a paradigm shift when we think about organizing. Step two, I first want to talk about looking at what we do online. How many of you do online banking? Right, like everyone. So for me, I not only just online banking in my different bank accounts, I have 5 email accounts. Being an advisor, I have to have logins for literally every single investment, someone I do an investment with, insurance. It can get obnoxious. And so what I have found most helpful for me is setting it up in a spreadsheet. And so what I have in the first column is just the website that I'm going to, directly to the login. I have it as a hyperlink, so I can literally just pull up my spreadsheet. It takes me right there. And then I have my username, password, security questions. If I'm putting bills on there, I'll put, what date it is that it's taken out of my account. If it's something it's the same amount, I'll also put the amount, so say student loans, and I find that immensely, immensely helpful. But, this is a live document, so it needs to be looked at regularly, and I think that's a theme that I'm going to be repeating. For example, I changed a password for something 2 days ago. This morning, it took me 5 hours, literally 5 hours, to realize that I wasn't getting email. I didn't remember what password I changed it to. Whereas if I would have used my own tool, right, I wouldn't have been on the phone not being able to email John back, So anyways, this is a really good tool, but there are 2 things that I want to bring up about this. It's not something that I'm going to recommend for just everyone, because if it is on your computer, you have to make sure that you have a very good firewall, hands down, and also make sure that it's a password protected or encrypted document, or else any hacker out there, this is going to be better than their birthday, because they're going to have access to every one of your possible accounts. So make sure that you do that. If you don't prefer to have a spreadsheet, something else I also do is I have, it's like a little note card notebook. So think of a password Rolodex. And so I have that in my office with the same information on it, but I have a hard copy. And I hope that if someone breaks into my office, they're not going to be grabbing little notebooks that they see. They'll probably be grabbing other things. So that makes you feel more comfortable. I think that's a really good idea as well. And then something else that has to do with online, some of my clients have used mint.com, mint.com, and it's a free website. And you can put all your different bank accounts, your mortgage information, student loan information, different investments. And so you go to this site, as I said, it's free, and it gives you a snapshot of your entire financial portfolio and where your cash is. And I think there's actually really cool things you can do on there as far as it's showing you where your spending's been. So I think that's fascinating. So that might be a good tool if you kind of get overwhelmed with having to log into all your accounts, and some of them you can kind of put together in this one place. So the step 3, I call organizing the paper trail. And I think for a lot of us, when we talk about organizing financial documents, that's what we think of, all the stuff, like all the paper we get. So what I want to do is kind of go through some of the main categories and give you some ideas of things you should keep, not keep. I'm also going to be talking about some of the things regarding taxes. So, you know, I am not a CPA. I do have tax experience as far as education-wise, but Janice here is our CPA. So if you have more specific questions, you can definitely ask her after. So some of the things that I have found just kidding. Some of the things that I have found to be most helpful in organizing is either a binder system or a file system. And I like to use a combination of both. But again, security is key. So I recommend to either put it into a locked file cabinet, or what we actually do for our financial planning clients is we have a document safe, and we give them with all the hanging files in them, and I know you can purchase those online, but either way, there's a lot of crucial and sensitive information that you just don't want hanging out in your kitchen hutch. So let's go one by one through some of the things I put on there. So those of you that have insurance, life insurance, or insurance in general. You know, if you have home insurance, maybe you keep a binder and you have all that information in there, or you put a tab for your different insurance accounts. But specifically when it comes to life insurance, say you have a term policy on yourself, and then a term policy on your spouse, and then maybe work gives you a policy that's up to $50K. There's not usually a whole ton of paperwork that comes along with that. So I would definitely keep the initial contract and then the contact information of who sells it to you. You would be surprised how many people, well, I know I have this much, but I cannot tell you where it's from or who sold it to me, which makes, you know, finding things a little more difficult. So again, just a separate tab for each one. Make sure you keep that crucial information. And if there's anything annual coming in, definitely keep that as well. When it comes to whole life policies, for those of you that have whole life or you're thinking about getting whole life, again, keep the contract, keep the contact information, but also the illustrations that they give you, whether it's before you buy it or if it's part of the contract. So say you're getting whole life through a mutual company and they have, you know, the guaranteed, you know, percentage, and then they have the estimates of the dividends they pay out. Well, if you don't keep that and you're just like, oh, this year I got this many dividends, 2 years from now I get this many, well, you're doing yourself a disservice, because what I recommend you doing is to keep that information and keep it as a benchmark. If it's 5-10 years down the road and they have grossly underestimated the dividend payout, well, then that's worth a conversation. Or it's worth looking at you know, other options for yourself. So just make sure, you know, you're really doing yourself the service by keeping that. Same thing for retirement broker accounts. You know, a lot of times you'll get monthly or quarterly statements in. Once you receive the annual statement, you don't need to keep the monthly and quarterly. I mean, those can be shredded, but you definitely want to keep the annual statements, and I always have it, you know, reverse chronological, most recent first on top. And again, same thing. You want to be really looking at how those returns are doing for you. If you're working with an advisor or a planner, they are going to be watching your money, but a lot of times if they're not managing it in-house, then they're using other managers. And say you have a mutual fund with Vanguard. Vanguard's not going to call you and be like, by the way, we're doing a really poor job over the last 5 years. You should look at investing with someone else. Not going to happen. But again, if you're looking at the benchmark, you know, say it's buy and hold strategy, and the benchmark is just the S&P. Well, 2008 is down 40%, and yours was down 35%. Well, to them, that's doing a good job. That's probably not doing a good job for you. So again, you are staying in control by making sure that you're watching where your money goes. Which brings me to a good point. You should probably read what comes in the mail. I have a lot of clients that are like, well, I just thought I'd ask you when I see you a couple times a year. Okay, I mean, that's okay, but not really. I mean, if it has anything to do with taxes, things like that, you just want to make sure that you at least know what's there. You don't have to keep everything. If it's something, again, if it's a monthly statements, keep it till the end of the year. But I think it's important to read what's coming in. And if you don't understand something, that's totally fine. Most of my clients don't understand everything that comes in the mail. So ask your advisor, ask your planner, or if you invested something on your own, then call the company, make sure you get clarification and make sure that you just are understanding what's coming to you. So next I had wills, POAs, that kind of stuff. Again, absolutely needs to be in a safe, in a locked file cabinet. You can keep those together. Receipts for the current tax year. So some of you might be business owners or independent contractors, but I'm kind of just going to focus on the personal side of things. What I do, and that works really well for me, is I just have a big manila envelope, and I don't have anything too crazy on the personal side, so it's more manageable than for my business side of things. But literally just stick them in there, and then at the end of the year, bring them to my accountant if they need to look at anything. And the statute of limitations for that is 3 years, unless you're fraudulent, and then the IRS will look at your entire life. But assuming we're all honest, moral people, that's around 3 years. Same thing for tax returns. I'm sure you guys keep your tax returns, but again, it's really helpful just to keep everything in the same place, just so you can have access to it. I put vehicles on there. The things that you should keep for your vehicle, obviously the deed, title. You don't need to keep every record of an oil change or tire rotation. It's really unnecessary. But major repairs, things like that are important when you sell it. I have my folder. I got my car 5 years ago, so I have everything important in there. And a couple months ago, my car had gotten broken into. I'm in Chicago. Stuff happens, fine. So I took a few things, and then it's just disconcerting. So the stuff in my glove compartment was just everywhere, and I had, my owner's manual. I'm like joking with my friends. I'm like, what, I'd have to be such an idiot to leave anything important in there. So I go into my file folder of my car, and I'm like, my title's not in there. Where's the title of my car? I know it was in here. Well, turns out the title of my car had been sitting in my glove box since the day I bought it. Just the burglars weren't very good, because or else I would have been carless and iPodless. So I'm glad the iPod's missing. So it's very simple. It's easy to make a mistake. I could have sworn it was in there. So just to let you know, if you make mistakes, you're not the only one. Same thing with the house. You want to keep the important information, deeds, things like that. Again, if you have, obviously you have home insurance, you can keep that with your insurance file. But I think the most important thing is that it's just separated and it's easy to find. You don't have to use my system. I'm not going to use your system, but you just have to make sure that it works for you. For bank statements, for those of you that still get paper bank statements, if you're not doing online banking at all, then you just want to make sure that your statements are reconciled, and that after that you don't have to keep them. So as far as what to put in there, I went over a lot of it, the contact information, initial contract. As I can't stress enough, just definitely to read what's coming in the mail. And I want to give you a personal example of 2 of my clients. So as John had mentioned, I do divorce planning. And so what that looks like is I work with individuals going in the process or after divorce, but part of what I do is settlement projections. And that's based on their income, their assets, all of their expenses, and it's extremely detailed, and a lot of them bring it to court and show it to their attorneys. So I won't sign off on anything unless I have seen with my own eyes the contract, what it's worth, or else I'm putting them and myself, making myself liable. So I have 2 of the clients I was working with, complete opposite sides of the spectrum. One was a woman, and maybe women are better organizers, maybe not, but this particular case she was. Everything that I needed from her, she got back to me within 24 hours, which is miraculous. Stuff from her husband who's been living overseas for the last 3 years, literally every single document within 24 hours. Super helpful, because my divorce planning clients I have on a retainer, and so if I have to do more work with them, sometimes they're okay with that, but that's money that they're paying me, whereas if they were more organized, they wouldn't have to pay me. So it's not right or wrong, that's just how it works. Opposite side of the spectrum, I'm working with a physician who's also going through a divorce, and we just started working together 5 months ago. I have received very, very little from him. For example, when you get divorced, for those of you divorced or know someone that is, you file the financial affidavit, which is your sworn statement of income and expenses. It took him almost 2 years into the divorce process to even fill that out. He was so lost with everything, he hired his CPA to go through 2 years of bank statements and paid him $2,000 just to help him with that one document. That's a big chunk of change. And our process is taking so much longer because he doesn't know where to find anything. Every time he needs something, he's having to call his attorneys. Well, they're billing him every time he calls. So just to give you an example of kind of real world experience just in my client work, that it's just much more beneficial, and I guarantee that the woman that I'm working with is breathing a lot easier, one, because she's not paying me as much, but also because she has control over where things are, and she knows where she is, and she knows where she's going. So I just wanted to share that with you because it's a big thing. So the next thing I want to talk about is probably not exactly what everyone thinks about when they talk about organizing financials, but cash flow. And people say cash is king. No, cash flow is definitely king. So this is actually a snapshot of, if you can see it, of the spreadsheet I send to every single person I work with. Once they decide to become a client of mine, I won't make any recommendations. I will barely do anything with them. This is the first thing we do together. And so it's your income minus expenses, and it's very detailed. And actually, if any of you would like a copy of this, I'd be happy to email it to you, so you can just ask me after we're done tonight. So this is first, and what it shows at the very bottom, it's 2 pages, is what discretionary income, what extra income do you have left. So I encourage my clients, go through a year, go through 6 months, grab your highlighters, spend a couple hours, get this down. And why is this so important? Not only as advisors and planners can we not make recommendations unless we know where our clients really are, but how do you know where to set your goals? How do you know what your benchmark is if you don't even know what your spending is? And again, this isn't right or wrong, but this is a very good eye-opener. I do this for myself every 6 months, and every 6 months I am shocked at sometimes where my money goes. And I'm a planner. I have all my accounts set up, but even with my discretionary income, you don't always realize this. So cash flow comes before a budget. So it's cash flow and then budgeting, and then it's the goal setting. Well, what do I have, and what do I want that to do for me? So I know that Mark and Janice are definitely going to be tying up with that. And one other thing I wanted to mention about that, like for example, when I graduated college, I went to Loyola University Chicago, and I studied abroad, which was amazing. And when I graduated, I knew that one of the most important things for me was going to be to travel. Something I'm very passionate about. I'd rather do that than most things. And so my first employer was marketing director for a healthcare company. And literally within 2 months of me working there, I talked to our HR person. I'm like, listen, I just want to set up 2 accounts. So I want this amount of money to go into a separate bank account, and I want the rest of the money to go to my regular checking account where I pay my bills out of and everything like that. Well, since I graduated college, I didn't have to worry about if a last minute trip came up. I didn't have to worry about if I wanted to go to Europe, on occasion, because that money was already there. I didn't have to mess up my budget. I didn't have to mess up my other plans because I was planning ahead. And a lot of banks do that for Christmas funds. I'm sure most of us spend more in November and December than we do the rest of the year. Maybe, just a little. So, if you can set that up ahead of time, then you don't have to, well, I can't contribute as much to my 401k this month. So again, it's just really important to look at cash flow. There's no judgment going on. It's good to get an idea of where you are, because sometimes it escapes us. So the last and final step I've kind of been hinting at all along is it's good to track and maintain what we're doing. So let me go back to the gym example. Someone just shout out, what's the most popular gym month during the year? January, yes. It's so crowded. And then afterwards, there's very, very few people there come March and April. So it's the same thing. I will commend you if you sit down this weekend and organize your financial documents, but that is just one piece of the puzzle. So again, your incoming statements, maybe you have it somewhere in your kitchen, and once a week, once a month, you have it just a current folder. and then you continue to organize it. And that is so crucial. It's like what I was talking about in looking at even, say, your retirement account or your investments. How are you giving yourself control and power if you're just letting it be? You're not. And so I really encourage you to make sure that, again, I'm not asking you to like it. I'm not asking you to enjoy it, but it's, you look at what you're committed to in the future and whatever your financial goals are. And I just hope that organizing and staying organized with this makes that a little less painful. So thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Shireen. I'm going to step over to the side here, and hopefully everyone will be able to see the slides I've got. I got a little bit longer presentation, but I'll try to keep it moving a little bit. The title of my portion of the presentation tonight is Retirement Basics, and it has to do with the fact that most of us in the financial planning world, a huge aspect of what we're doing is helping people plan for their long-term financial security, plan for the retirement. And I would suggest that whether you're in your 20s or you're in your 50s or older, retirement planning should be an important priority, because the days of not addressing these kinds of issues are long gone. You think about your parents, possibly your grandparents, having pensions from working for companies for 30 years or more. For the most part, those are all gone. So our economic and financial system is such that we are all responsible for planning for our own retirement. Next slide, please. So long-term or retirement planning really, we look at it really as being a roadmap. There's a process that's involved in this, and all of the interesting things about how you implement this just kind of follows through. But before you can get into any kind of implementation, you have to go through a couple of steps. Next part, John. And in fact, you could kind of bring it around to everything. So what you'll see here in this clever graphic is that you have to begin the plan by asking some basic questions of yourself, okay? It's sort of like, as the title implies, using a roadmap. Before you go somewhere, you have to ask yourself, where are you going to go and how are you going to get there? By asking the questions of what you want your retirement to look like, and by going through the exercise of crunching some key numbers, then you're in a very good position to identify the different kinds of tools and the kinds of products that are out there to help you achieve this successful retirement. Things like tax advantage retirement vehicles, potentially annuities, other types of investments, and insurance, or protecting against undue risk, with the hope of having a successful retirement. Next slide, please. The first step in that process was to start now, and I would certainly encourage everyone in the room tonight to think seriously, if they have not already begun to think about setting aside funds for retirement, but to do so as soon as is practical for them. And the reason why you do that is because under the second bullet, the sooner you start, the longer your investments have to grow. And it's much harder to delay, even for a number of years, say in your 20s, and catch up than if you had the opportunity to set aside money sooner. John, a couple of those will show you the numbers. This is just an example to show what a $3,000 annual investment would grow to when an individual starts at age 20, when an individual starts at age 35, and when an individual starts at 45. So you can really see the dramatic difference in the numbers. Next slide, please. The basic considerations: what kind of retirement do you want? When do you want to retire? How long will retirement last? Next slide, please. So as far as the basic considerations go, some of the things we look at when we work with people is what are the kinds of things they want to accomplish in their retirement? Typically, they want to make sure that they cover all of their basic living expenses, but they also want to do other things that they never had the opportunity to do or didn't have enough time to do when they were working. Things like the freedom to travel or pursue hobbies. Another basic consideration, one of the basic questions, when do you want to retire? Obviously, the sooner you retire, the earlier you retire, the less time you have for the funds that you save to accumulate, and the longer those dollars have to last. Next slide. Social Security isn't available until 62, and Medicare isn't available till 65, so it's important to make sure you account for those sources of income and health care. The last major question, how long do you anticipate retirement to last? Well, of course, no one knows how long they're going to live, but as John was alluding to, life expectancies are growing longer and longer. As of the data from March 2011, the average 65-year-old American can expect to live almost another 19 years, and really it's important to plan for retirement of 25 years or more. Next question, or next slide. The second point in that roadmap that I put up earlier was the idea of crunching the numbers. Really, retirement planning comes down to the idea of figuring out how much you're going to need to live on in retirement, figuring out how much income you'll have available to you, identifying the gap or the difference there, and then figuring out how you're going to fund that gap. You want to account for inflation. You want to account for special expenses as well. Next slide. So in terms of estimating retirement expenses, or the first step of that, you perhaps are aware of different rules of thumb, that you'll need some sort of percentage of pre-retirement income. And to some degree that's true, but the reality is that once people retire, they often find that the expenses that they incur in retirement replace expenses that they had while they were working. So it's better to think more about the actual expenses that you have, how those may change, and how new ones may come up. Next slide. I alluded to the fact that years ago, pensions and Social Security provided a large portion of most Americans' retirement savings and income. And while some of these tools are still available, i.e. Social Security, and for some people traditional pension, it's significantly more important to have individual savings and investments to rely on in retirement. Next. Excuse me. After you've crunched the basic numbers of looking at your expenses and the sources of your income, you're going to see most likely that there's going to be a gap. And if you can run one more token on that, John, I think you'll see the numbers. In this example, the individual's expenses may be $50,000, but through Social Security and other sources, they may have $20,000 available. So they need to really come up with a way to fund that remaining $30,000 in the example. Next slide, please. A gap like that is almost certainly going to be largely funded by the ability to generate a pool of money that you hopefully will have built up while you were in your working years. In this example, the indication is that in order to meet that gap of $30,000 a year for a 25-year retirement period, you need to enter retirement with a lump sum of just under $400,000. And with drawdowns of approximately $30,000 a year and investment growth pegged at about 6%, you should have sufficient funds to meet that gap. Next slide, please. One of the things that can throw a monkey wrench into any plan is accounting for inflation. And it's important to think about your lifestyle expenses and your retirement living expenses and what the impact of inflation is on that. This graphic shows that at a 6% rate of return of $5,000 were invested annually, at a 2.6% annual inflation rate, a sum of money equal to $395,000 really has the buying power of only $183,000. Next slide, please. So that's kind of the basics of working through retirement planning. As I said, you identify your goals, you identify the resources that are available to you, you determine whether or not your resources are going to be sufficient to fund your expenses, and then you work to identify tools that you can use to build up these resources. Certainly the most popular ones are tax advantage savings vehicles. These include 401k plans, they include traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs. And we'll spend a couple minutes talking about that. Is everyone familiar with the tax advantages for 401k plans and Roth IRAs? Certainly the major advantage is that monies that go into these accounts are not currently taxed until you draw down on them, hopefully at a retirement age. Next slide, please. And you can run a couple more of these points all at one time before we get off the slide. Great, thanks. So the IRAs, as I've indicated, and these are some of the characteristics of IRAs right now. For 2012, the stipulated level maximum contribution to an IRA is $5,000. Individuals age 50 or older can make additional catch-up contributions of $1,000 a year. I had mentioned the tax advantage features that taxes are not actually assessed on these until funds are withdrawn, hopefully later at a retirement age. And in an IRA, there's, as the slide indicates, a wide range of investment options. Next slide, please. All right, one of the main questions that a lot of folks have is, should they contribute to a traditional IRA or should they contribute to a Roth IRA? And I have another slide on this, but before going into that, I just kind of like to identify the differences of them right now. With a traditional IRA, contributions are typically tax deductible unless you are covered by an employer-sponsored retirement plan or unless your income is too large and the funds grow tax deferred. With a Roth IRA, there's no current income tax deduction on making the contributions. Funds go into the Roth IRA on an after-tax basis, and like a traditional IRA, they continue to grow tax deferred. Next slide. This is a summary of the rules regarding distributions of these IRAs. And the major difference between the traditional IRA and the Roth IRA is that with the traditional IRA, distributions are subject to federal income taxes, while with the Roth IRA, as long as distributions are used for retirement in general, in other words, held for at least 5 years and taken out after age 59 and a half, along with some other exceptions, distributions are free of federal income taxes. So, as I was saying, the question often comes up, should you contribute to a traditional IRA or contribute to a Roth IRA? What I find in my practice is that if income earners are in a fairly low income tax bracket or they expect that their income is going to grow in the future, it makes sense to invest in a Roth IRA at this point in time because the amount of taxes that they have to pay before making the contribution is relatively low. On the other hand, if they're in a higher earning bracket right now and able to make a traditional IRA contribution, it would make more sense to it often makes more sense to defer the current income taxes by making contributions to the traditional IRA. Plus, a traditional IRA will allow them to have a bigger deferral currently. The other major tax advantage savings vehicle in the tax code is the 401k plan. For this year, individuals, employees of employers sponsoring 401k plans can defer up to $17,000 of compensation. Individuals 50 or older can make additional catch-up contributions of $5,500. And just like with the IRA, funds grow tax deferred until they're withdrawn. Oftentimes, employers will match contributions in 401k plans that employees make, and that's an extremely attractive reason for any employee to contribute to a 401k plan. Next slide, please. Just like with IRAs, recently, well, I shouldn't say recently, but over the last several years, many employers have been offering a Roth option in the 401k plan, analogous to a Roth option in an IRA. So the similar considerations hold regarding the decision to make a Roth contribution to an IRA or to invest in a Roth 401k plan as opposed to a initially tax-deferred 401k plan. And again, if you're in a low income tax bracket, it might make sense to invest in the Roth option in a 401k plan. Next slide, please. You can run through a couple of those. Thank you. One of the other important considerations in developing a retirement plan is how are you going to invest the funds that you're setting aside? There's a lot of basic considerations that are given here. For example, your timeline. If you're in your 50s or older, you may, you've got a shorter time horizon until you begin using your funds for retirement. So it would make perhaps more sense to invest more conservatively with your investment assets than you would if you were in your 20s or 30s. The risk and return considerations come into play here as well. What's your personal tolerance for investment risk? If you have a high tolerance for investment risk, then the riskier type investments, typically stock-based investments, would make more sense for you than fixed income type investments. You'd want to take a look at the the targeted rate of return of an investment portfolio. And by that I mean by building up an investment portfolio, what kind of rate of return do you anticipate needing in order to meet your retirement plan goals? And that may very well define how much of your investment assets are going to be invested in riskier stocks and how much are going to be invested in less risky assets. Diversification is hugely important. And before I talk about this next slide, I guess I would just offer the observation that I feel that it's important for every investor, whether they're in retirement, whether they're approaching retirement, or whether they're many, many, many years away from retirement, to invest in what I'd say is a well-diversified type investment portfolio. And by well-diversified, I mean investments that consist of both stock-type investments and stock mutual funds, bond or fixed income type investments or mutual funds, and probably cash, bank CDs and savings accounts. And it's important to understand that investing shouldn't be an either-or type thing. So one shouldn't think about investing either in stocks or in bonds. As I said, I think it's important for everybody to have a mix of all three of those major asset classes. Where the art of the financial planning comes in is helping people to understand, based on their financial circumstances, based on their investment tolerance, based on their goals, how much of their portfolio should be invested in each of those three major classes. Another reason for investing in 3 classes is that ideally they're going to be diversified. And so in typical financial markets, what you often find is that when the equity and stock markets are doing very well, perhaps the bond markets aren't doing as well. And in vice versa, when the bond markets are doing well, or I should say, when the equity markets aren't doing as well, the bond markets tend to outperform. So by holding on and developing a diversified portfolio like that, what you're going to hopefully do is smooth out the variability of returns and just be in a better position over time to build the resources that you need to accomplish your financial goals. I think the last major step in implementing the financial plan has to do with the role of insurance, or as it said here, protecting against risk. Certainly, it's very reasonable to look at the major risks that are out there and determine whether or not you can afford to carry those risks yourself. Okay, so the purpose of insurance is, as it says, to shift financial risk to the insurer. Okay, so a basic example is automobile insurance, and we all carry automobile insurance, not just because the state says we have to, but because we can't frequently carry the risk of replacing an automobile should it become totally damaged or significantly damaged in an accident. Same kind of thing applies to different types of risks, either during your working years or in your retirement years. Disability income insurance is a hugely important consideration. While or should something occur to any worker and they become disabled in some way, shape, or form, and can't work, how are they going to replace their income in order to continue to meet living expenses? And disability insurance takes on that risk. In retirement, a couple of areas to consider, of course, is health insurance, and a significant one, and more significant, is called long-term care insurance. The risk of longevity and not being able to function in certain activities of daily living. So I don't want to spend too much time on the insurance aspect of it, but suffice it to say that it is prudent to be looking seriously at insurance as a way to shift risk that's too great for any one of us to bear to an insurer. The final step after developing the plan is implementing it. And so just to kind of recap the steps that we had seen already, it's important to be in a position to think about this and develop the roadmap. If you're comfortable with this kind of thing, you feel certainly and feel either proficient or are willing to learn, I certainly encourage people to develop their own roadmap. But most people are looking for somebody to bounce ideas off of, and so this is probably kind of one of the most important reasons why you should work with a financial professional or advisor. Going back to the slide that I'd shown earlier about the benefits of starting saving earlier, to the extent possible, it makes a lot of sense to start your savings early and as soon as can. Investing regularly adds a lot of benefits to the ability to build your resource pool, looking at the appropriate insurance coverage, and then finally reviewing the plan that you've set out for yourself periodically to understand whether or not you're on track, to understand whether or not it makes sense based on changes in your life or changes in your goals. So thank you very much.
Thank Thank you. Now for last but not least. One of the things that I think you heard from all three, both John and Mark and Shireen, was about the things that influence the plan. And what I'm going to try to do in my part is, because I think we all agree, Shireen, we need that organization. The only thing I disagree with is that I am one of those people who wakes up wanting to get organized. So there are some of us out there. But what we do want to emphasize, I think, is the importance of you taking action, because you can either have a financial plan, work with a professional, get the education, or you can take no time, no money, predictable results, and we call that a plan for poverty. So if you do nothing, that's what you're looking at. One of the things that you've been able to see this evening also is a deep dive into how you can organize your records and some of the files you should keep. You've also seen a deep dive into the retirement area, which is the long-term plan. What all of us also deal with is both short-term and mid-term. And the reason that has become very important is for all of the reasons that you've heard from everybody prior to me, and that is the recession has caused people to spend down their retirement. Nobody expected to lose their job at 45 or 50 and be unemployed for several years and have their house underwater and have a big mortgage. So now they're tapping into that retirement plan that was so very important. Very, very poignantly points out the need to do short-term and mid-term planning as well. I'm sure Mark would agree that when he's talking about retirement planning, he's not talking about putting every dollar you have out to the future. There's a need to have that emergency fund. You've got to have money to go to if you do have that job loss. You've got to have that emergency fund for those break-ins of your car, if you lose your car or whatever, but you've got to be able to turn somewhere. And I think Shireen touched on it too with cash flow, to be able to plan all along the way so that when you do go to take that trip or you do go to buy that major purchase or whatever it is, that money's already there because you've been putting away for it systematically all along the way. The midterm plan comes in basically to bridge another gap, and that's something that we saw quite a bit, unfortunately, with what went on in our economy in the last 10 years. Investments were underperforming, and people were living off of their short-term savings if they had them. If they didn't, they went to their retirement accounts. And what we find is that they're losing their home, they're losing everything that they've invested into this point. You really don't want to be in that situation. The importance of a plan and using a professional is to get the education of all of these outside influences that impact whether or not you are going to be successful in your plan. All of these things that you've heard tonight are extremely important. We all apply these principles, but it's very important that you connect the dots from getting your files in order. Even if it's not a file, I like the idea of the big envelope because that's what I used to tell my tax clients. I don't expect you to file all these receipts, just keep them. So there are simple things that you can do, and you can kind of trick yourself into being organized. And once you start to see those accounts grow and you're able to move to the next level, you're able to look at, I think Mark referred to them as tools, I call them options. We don't deal in products as a product, at least none of us do on this panel. You're not going to find a flavor of the month. You really need a plan, and you need to have a tool or an option or several. And the education piece comes into play as far as understanding what those options are. The three of us had a conversation before this panel started, and it was interesting to see how absolutely consistent we all feel about the importance of having those options and having the client make that decision. It's up to you to become educated, and we're here to facilitate that education. We're here to provide you with information that you will need in order to make those decisions, because it's a very complicated and complex world in the financial area. I know my clients, the majority of them will start out with, I don't know anything about this, or I'm not a sophisticated investor. You probably know much more than you give yourselves credit. Because if you've had a checking account, if you've had a credit card, even if you've abused it, you know the repercussions of it. So you've learned something. And if you can build on that knowledge. And I would like to add on to something Mark said about start early for your retirement plan. Start early to plan for everything. I think it's very important that today, when you walk out of here, I know I heard that those of you who are students had to put together a business plan, a marketing plan, and spreadsheets and all of that. I love that stuff. You need to take that information, that education, and not look at it as a punishment before graduation or before you get your grade, but actually look at what the information that gives you, because it's going to help you understand and better provide for your future. There are all of us who've worked with business owners. The most successful business owners are those who continually get education from their CPAs, their attorneys, their financial advisors, all of it. They do not try to operate in a vacuum and say, go ahead and make that decision for me. That's not good delegating. That's not even what I would consider delegating. But it's important that you develop some sort of strategy from day one to be able to provide for all of your needs and wants. For now, when you buy that home, if you haven't purchased a home yet, and when you start planning for your future, I know the industry as a whole has started to get away from the word retirement, because it's almost like talking about death anymore, because everybody has to keep pushing it out. So we talk about financial independence. It's no different. At what point do you want to be able to say, I no longer have to work. I want to work or I don't want to work, and make that happen. One of the other things that, as previous speakers were talking, the Christmas fund, I think Shireen brought that up. That's a short term, but that's planning. So whether you realize it or not, if you've done something like that, or even if you've saved for a car or a party or clothing, that's planning. If you can kind of build on that, I think you're going to do yourselves a big favor. The importance of a plan and why you would need it, I think it was Mark that said, it's a roadmap. You can't get from point A to point B without that. You can't meet any goals unless you absolutely commit to something or write it down. The investment that you make with your time and your money and getting the education will pay off down the road much more than people realize. One thing that I think was also brought up, we can't count on Social Security. Definitely, if some of the people that I'm looking at now are much too young to really count on that. Do we put it into the plan? Absolutely, because it's currently there. But I think you saw on many of the worksheets and the slides that were up there, current and proposed. The other reason you would want to work with somebody is a financial plan is a process. It is not a purchase. And a financial plan, to borrow some terminology from somebody else, it's a journey, not a destination. You have to continue to revisit it. It's the old buy and hold is appropriate in certain aspects of a plan, but plan and hold is not an option, because things will happen in your life day to day that will change. It will change who you are and what you need. It'll change who you're responsible for. It may even change, and we're looking at sandwich generation now too. We're talking to people who are still putting children through college, and yet they're looking at putting their parents in some sort of long-term care. So things change. That is not the way it was 25, 30 years ago. And you know from going through college and going out into the job market, that's different too. Employers used to offer pensions and all kinds of benefits. They've scaled that way back. It was unheard of many years ago for individual employees to have to share in the cost of their benefit plans, their insurance. And now, sometimes you don't even have a choice. Hopefully your employer is able to offer it. But all of these things that impact what's going to happen to you between today and when you are no longer working and you've decided you're financially independent, hopefully that was the decision, and not to plan for poverty. You need to start today and do that in stages. It'll be the short term, the midterm, and the long term. And believe it or not, you can do some of them simultaneously. So this is not a start here, this is the first thing you buy. Depends upon you. You're all individuals, and I believe all of us on this panel would never have a template. I know I used to tell my tax clients, when you come in, I don't have your tax return ready to show you a sample of it. I need to get to know you. I need to find out the data, which is what Shireen was talking about. You need to have that information. You need to understand the information that impacts you in order to get from point A to point B. I'm going to be the shortest person because I know, not literally, I probably am that too, but the shortest speaker because I think that we would really like your input in your questions. So I'll just open it up to that.
I thought I'd kind of bridge the gap here a little bit between the prepared remarks of our panelists and the questions that you have, with maybe a couple questions that I have. So if you would indulge me on that, I think I'll ask each of the panelists a question. Shireen, I was going to ask you, if I'm a college student, what kind of advice or tips or recommendations could you give a college student as to what kind of records and what kind of time commitment they would need to get their record keeping in order?
Thank you. That's a really good question. Thanks, Jen. I mean, from the students who are here, I can tell you're a little older, more experienced, so if I'm telling you something that you already know, forgive me. But there are a few things that I think are very relevant to you now, and that will also be very relevant post-graduation. Or for those of you that have college kids, just keep this in mind. One of the biggest things that I think is important, I mean, you may not have a mortgage, you're not paying your student loans yet, most likely, but a lot of times if you're living in an apartment, you're sharing it with roommates, you have bills, right? So, I think I mentioned I graduated from Loyola Chicago, and, Jan's made a good point. She likes being organized. I mean, I am a pretty organized person. So I had kept track of all of my bills for each of the apartments I lived in. ComEd, Peoples, Comcast, whatever. But I made sure that I kept track of it so I could share it with my roommates. Well, I'm very glad I did. If I didn't keep track of it, they just came in the mail and I paid it. But because I had kept track, I noticed that a few of them weren't getting sent to me. And I called, and they basically said, oh, good thing you called. We definitely did send it. It's your fault. And by the way, we were going to turn you into a collection agency tomorrow. I'm like, seriously? I paid every single bill. So that's just something, if you don't have a lot of, bills going on, it's just to keep track of what you do have going on, make sure that you're paying them. Again, can't control these companies and they're going to do what they want. So I know most of us love Comcast. But the second thing, just to be aware of is, the things that you're doing that affect your credit score. So credit cards, I don't think credit cards are bad, and I think they're definitely good even throughout college to build credit. The thing to keep in mind with that is, so after you graduate, maybe if you're looking to buy a car and you're going to get financed. Well, when they pull your credit, you want to make sure that you're very aware of what you have on your other credit cards. So for example, if you have a $5,000 limit on your credit card, you have $4,000 on there, you're going to get dinged that you're almost to the max. So just be aware of when you're applying for those sort of things that you're probably lower on the payment if you can. I think probably the last and probably most relevant thing is about student loans. Well, you guys are already in college. I'm not sure if Kendall College, if you guys lock in the tuition, but I'm a certified college planning specialist. College tuition cost of attendance has increased at 5.2% a year. That surpassed healthcare. It's double inflation. It's nauseating, to say the least. With that, a lot of changes have been made with lenders. So, for example, I had taken out student loans. It switched lenders 2 or 3 times. So the first thing I did was consolidate my loans, and that's something I would definitely recommend. So depending on what the rates are, it'll be prorated depending on how much the loan is for and then what it's consolidated to. But I think that makes it much easier, so you're not paying 3 different things. Again, I switched. I had no control over that. They just sent me something in the mail. Consolidating my Stafford loans and getting that paperwork in order was such a hassle. People said they would send. I was paying at 1.2 at the same time because they didn't tell me that they had consolidated or not. So I think if you have loans or if your kids have loans, that's probably going to be something extremely helpful, and to keep all of that information, especially about, say, deferral. What if you don't have a job right away? There are some forgiveness options, but you at least want to make sure that you know what they are, and if you don't, what those penalties are going to be. And then real quick, I know I'm kind of taking a long time answering this question. I just think it's so crucial. One of the things, because doing college planning, I'm working with students, and I actually am working with some older students that are in their mid-20s. And some of the things that I'm talking to them about is, again, looking at cash flow. Even in college, you just want to be aware of your spending habits, and then look at what job am I applying for? What does that income look like? And is there a gap? So kind of what Mark was talking about in retirement. Is there a gap now between your expenses and your income that you're going to get out of college? And so I think that just looking at those few things, and then what else I had talked about as far as the documents and everything like that, that'll give you a really good head start. So thank you.
Thanks, Shireen. Mark, I've got a question for you. And really this comes from the comments that I started the conversation with tonight. And that's if I'm a gray-haired individual and I had been saving religiously for my retirement and saving responsibly for myself, and I found myself out of work for a period of time and I've burned through some of those savings, are there strategies, are there tactics that I can catch up? Should I catch up? Is there a time horizon that I can catch up and get back to where I was before? And what kind of things would you advocate or strategize in those situations?
Well, thanks. Thanks for the question, John. Certainly, I think anyone who has set aside money with the idea of using it many years down the road and then is forced for whatever reason to take money out kind of wants to get that money back up to the level where it was as quickly as possible. It's actually a common trait. It's probably no different than any other kind of investor who sees the price of their stock going up to a certain amount and it comes down, and they feel that they want to see it get back up to that level. The reality is that almost in all circumstances, things have changed in the economy. Things have changed in the markets, and the financial situation in which your assets grew to a certain level, that condition no longer exists. So you got to kind of look going forward and think about revising a plan. Got to think about not so much about getting those assets back to where they were, but kind of how do you get those assets back to where they need to be, okay? And a big part of the reason is because if you do the other, if you try to get your money back to where it was, you're almost certainly going to be forced to take on far more investment risk, okay? The old adage that, there's no free lunch, and that higher returns are only achieved by taking on higher risks. Well, it's very much true over the long term in the investment markets. So in a situation where you've drawn down on assets, as I'd suggest, it makes a lot of sense to reevaluate your plan, look at what your new reality is, what your new situation is. Think about how you're going to work to build some of those assets up. Perhaps it's not going to be just on the investment pool, for example. Perhaps it's going to require working longer. Perhaps it's going to require cutting down on some expenses. Perhaps it's going to require rethinking about what your intermediate term and longer term goals are going to be. But I just am not a big proponent of, so to speak, rolling the dice to try to get those values that you once had back to that level.
Thank you, Mark. Janice, I've got a question for you. My students here will probably appreciate this. So when Janice was speaking emergency funds, I could see the eyes in my students starting to sparkle a little bit because we talked about this in class. And my class, many of the students that are here tonight, were always after me for benchmarking. So what kind of benchmark should I have for an emergency fund? What am I trying to look at a percentage of my salary that I'm trying to hit? Or am I trying to hit maybe a level of expenses over a period of time? Is it both? Or are you finding with some of your clients, Janice, that you're having to be a little more flexible with trying to set up that emergency fund? And what kind of benchmarks are you trying to get your clients to evolve into or achieve?
Thank you, and I'm so glad that you've started to talk to them about this already. Benchmarks have changed I've been involved in financial services and accounting for 33 years. And initially, way back when, we would say 3 months of your living expenses was a good benchmark. And then it became 6, and now I'm hearing people say a year. And I think what you should take from this is that you need to have something. One of the things that we're doing more and more of, because we're having to get away from the traditional thought process of just planning for 3 months. It used to be simple before the market got crazy. You'd have a 3-month emergency fund, you'd use your 401k, you'd be planning primarily for retirement. And what we're finding now is you really need to have not only diversification within your investments, but diversification within those products that you're investing in. Because if you're looking at protection, which you have to have your auto insurance, I think as you said, and your health insurance, and eventually your life insurance, I always find it interesting that people sometimes put that off, because my question is, do you expect your house to burn down when you buy that homeowner's insurance? Do you expect to total your car when you get your auto insurance? The only thing you're guaranteed to have insurance pay out on is if you die. So there are within that asset class, if you will, because we're kind of calling it that, there are ways that you can actually have flexibility in what you do. So as you are putting away for your short-term or your emergency fund, you can actually be building up cash values in products that have not high returns, but they're guaranteed returns, and you can have fallback. And I know with my clients, most of what we're doing is we're first trying to protect what they have, and then we're trying to build up that savings while simultaneously taking advantage of matches with 401ks. So the benchmark in my world becomes, how can we get a diversification of investments where you can use them in a flexible way? They can be utilized for multiple things. Because to put all of our eggs in one basket, I don't care how diversified you are within that investment, if it goes down, it goes down. And if it's out there long term, you're looking at, I don't know about you, but I think taxes are going to go up. I think inflation is going up. I think Mark brought that to our attention earlier. if you're putting everything out there, you're taking a tax deduction now to pay higher taxes when you actually take it out. So again, going back to using a planner for education, you can get that emergency fund, and it does not have to be sitting in a bank 3 months worth, 6 months worth, or 12 months worth of your income. It can be liquid cash, available cash if you need it, where you can borrow from yourself. It can be a combination, but you have to have the education to know when you put your money in a particular group of products, you've got to know what the accessibility is.
Thank you. Questions from the attendees?
Question with a 401k, when you actually enter into retirement, who holds that money? I mean, so like right now my employer holds a 401k while I'm contributing to it. What happens with that money at retirement?
Mark?
Thanks, John. Most people will take a lump sum distribution when they retire or leave their employer of their 401k money and roll it over to an IRA. And the IRA can be held by a bank, a trust department, a brokerage firm, a mutual fund company. You know, most investment product providers are equipped to hold IRAs for people. I would say it's a small number, but I think they're still out there, of employers, corporations, will actually continue to hold a 401k balance for you once you've severed employment, once you've retired from the firm. But really what I believe guides that is how the employer's plan is written. So you'd want to check with the HR people. As I said, the majority of people who retire, I think, are very comfortable with the idea of taking all the money out in a lump sum distribution. And as long as they roll it over to an IRA and meet a couple of other legal requirements and technical requirements, they don't have to pay taxes at the time of that distribution.
Any other questions? Good question.
Hello. My question is related to international students. Kendall College is made up of a lot of international students, and I'm among one of them. And interesting, in my private finance class, I've been learning about saving, about retirement, and about all these factors. And it has made me really curious of what my country is doing towards those areas. So I come from a developing country. Our inflation rate is pretty high. It went up to 20% last year. So pretty much, even when I look at people saving money, if our inflation is that high, and it could be higher, so pretty much their retirement may not be so much. So I had to think of ways, like, how am I going to be secured? So I'm looking into an emergency fund, like she talked about, which is true. I was looking into stocks as well, but that's pretty much for like the short run. Like, if I want to make sure I have a better retirement, then I would. What can I do? What areas should I look into if the social security of my country is not that well and our currency is not doing that well? And just one more point. I've tried to get life insurance. I'm really curious, so I try a lot of stuff. But unfortunately, I could not, because I've not been here for a long time. So yeah, what would you advise me?
Who wants to take this one? I'll go.
I'll give you my opinion and then ask the rest of the panel if they have any other ideas. You know, typically, in order to set aside funds that are going to outpace inflation, I think what you're what you've looked at, if I understood you correctly, was to invest in stocks. And at least here in this country, we've always, shouldn't say always, we have found that over long periods of time, stock investments are the best types of investments to have in order to overcome the effects of inflation and the effects of rising income taxes. Quite honestly, that's based on a stability of our currency, though, or that takes into account the fact that our currency is stable. I would still encourage you to look for those kinds of higher yielding investments, or perhaps, depending on how your economy is growing in the global marketplace, perhaps trying to identify opportunities to invest directly in businesses or other organizations that are doing, that you anticipate are going to be successful in a growing global economy. But with respect to setting aside funds for very short-term needs, most likely those solutions aren't going to be sufficient. I suspect you'd need to talk with bankers or others who deal in short-term type investment vehicles to understand what else is out there that can provide you with relatively immediate liquidity.
I appreciate your question a lot, and I'm sure that's kind of a difficult thing to approach. And based on what Mark was saying, as far as looking at things that have higher risk, I think that's a great point. And you're saying you're looking at stocks, so I don't know if you're referring to just buying stock in a particular company. What I have found, for some of my more people that want to take higher risk of my clientele, there are ways that, there are plenty of investment companies that, depending, it's like what Mark said earlier, if you want a higher return, that really comes along with higher risk. And so you don't really have to go, and I apologize if this is something you already know, but you don't have to feel like you have to just go buy stock in different companies. There's a lot of investment firms that have, you can build your portfolio around a number of different strategies. So some of them may be more in stock, and then you can allocate a certain percentage to alternative investments, which again would be higher risk and a higher chance of higher return. So again, there's just different options, and I have clients that use those both for short-term planning because it is very liquid, and also for more longer-term planning. So there are firms and managers out there that might be able to help you with that as well, if that's helpful.
I guess one of the questions that I have, or the biggest question I have, is the inflation rate of 20%. Do you know what that's based upon?
It's mainly political. We had a political campaign last year, and there was just a lot of political rage, a lot of shootings in the city, and a lot of things happening, and so the currency as well is affected by things like that. So pretty much a lot of businesses were shut down for a while, a lot of people were not really working, and with that it affected the economy.
One of the things, and again, coming from an accountant's thought, is that 20%, if you're coming from a low inflation to begin with and going up 20% and still not being higher than other countries, I think it's important that you put the measurement in perspective, because we can talk about taking more risk and maybe that'll get you there and maybe it won't. But the thing is, I guess I'm looking at more the number, because what would the requirement for you living in your own country, what kind of income stream or cash flow, whatever you want to call it, would make you comfortable in the current inflation? Because it may be that what we're answering is based upon our experience in this country and what we can do. But when you're talking about 20% inflation, we've not experienced that as advisors to have to basically invest against that. But I think at that point, what I would be doing, if you were my client, is looking back and saying, what kind of money do you need? Are you earning the money here and then going back to your country? Is there an opportunity in your country to earn enough money to sustain your lifestyle at whatever the inflation rate? And, you know, is the political situation going to be recurring, or is this something that you feel is a one-time thing and then it'll settle back? So I think for me there'd be many more questions to gather the information from you before I would feel comfortable even offering a suggestion at this point, which I know is not what you wanted to hear. But again, tonight we're here to basically, I think, give you points to think about so that you take the action to do what's right for you in your individual planning.
I just had another thought. I actually have a client who has set aside a portion of her money every month in an entity called, I believe it's prosper.com. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that or not, but it's an organization, online of course, that makes small loans to individuals with collectively, they tend to have a very good repayment rate. But because these borrowers are small, because they can't necessarily get funding through, you know, for whatever business opportunity they have, they can't get it from a bank or any other typical traditional financial institution, they're forced to pay a higher interest rate. But as I said, the ability to collect is typically very high. The default rate is typically very low. It's kind of a variation on what I was indicating as might be investing directly in businesses that you identify as being growing businesses in your country. So so ultimately, what I'm talking about is either direct investing through, you know, kind of a stock type investment or kind of a loan like that. So,
Thank you. Maybe a question more too? Okay.
Does the tax rate change after the age of 65? So if dollar for dollar, if you're earning X amount of money now and you've got a 20% tax rate, if you're over 65 or some age, does that tax rate change on your income, or is it always the same?
Tax rate changes. Everyone take that?
The tax rate is never geared to your age. The tax rate is geared to your taxable income. And I think traditionally the planning that we all did over the last 20 or 30 years, we assumed that you would be in a lower tax rate when you retired. I can tell you when I started doing taxes, the tax rate went up for individuals, went up to 55%. And it's the lowest right now that it's ever been. And we are spending money at the speed of light, and there's no way we can pay off all this debt without increasing taxes somewhere. So if you're asking me what's going to happen to your tax rate in retirement, and I'm assuming you're going to retire within the next 10 to 12 years, it's going to be higher if you are at the same income rate that you're at now, or yes, income level. Your rate is more likely to be higher than it is today, which is why I think all of us are reevaluating the approach that we're taking to the plans and making sure that we're filling in those gaps and starting from the short term going through the long term. They have to work together, because between taxes and inflation, the two things that we've heard questions on, those are the two biggest impacts that we're going to have to deal with as planners and as individual investors. So I'm not going to say no news is good news because I don't think the news is going to be good, but the rate is not tied to your age at all. Right.
Michelle.
So I have a question. Many of us may be starting our own businesses, thinking about starting our own businesses. And when we do that, oftentimes people will sort of have to decide how much of their own personal finances they should get involved. And so there's this overlap between their personal financial planning and their business startup plans. And so I guess I'd just like to hear any advice or maybe some words of wisdom on what to be careful about when one is considering that aspect of intermingling your personal finances to help you start a new business.
Who would like to take that?
What usually is the first rule of thumb is use other people's money. It's about leverage. And the thing that I can tell you in all of the years that I dealt with business clients and those startup companies is that unfortunately, banks do not want to loan you money when you need it. They only want to loan you money when you don't need it, and they can collect the interest. So given that it's going to be difficult to get outside money, there are sources you can go through to have, investors come in. Usually they want a piece of what you're developing. But if you're talking about generating your own business and thinking about putting your own money into it, I would sit down with an advisor and see what that impact is going to be on your personal plan if that business does not succeed, because that can be more devastating than losing a job and having a recession. Because if you have depleted everything and you've been out of the job market, and I can tell you as a former employer, it's very difficult to look at somebody who's been running the show as being comfortable and happy being an employee. So there's many different facets to that, but the quick and dirty answer is use somebody else's money.
I haven't dealt with that situation specifically, but if someone walked into my office next week and posed that to me, I think the first thing I would do along the lines of what I'm anticipating Jan is saying is look at their assets and liabilities as they stand right now and just say to them, okay, how much of your assets are you willing to put up at risk right now? And then I would strip those from the future consideration of the analysis, and I'd work up a plan, develop a projection, see if that income gap that I had referred to earlier, the difference between the $50,000 and $30,000, could be funded entirely on the assets that remain. Now that's perhaps overly conservative because no one enters into a business with the expectation that they're not going to get paid on it, they're not going to make money on it or not. But I think it's a bit of realism that has to be brought to the table. So that's kind of the first tangible step that I would do with that. And then from that point, I would have a discussion with my client, and we'd tweak the numbers here and there. But at least I'd feel better that my client was going into this venture with his eyes wide open.
Any other questions? I think we have time for one more. Louis?
I guess my question is for a student that's freshly coming out of college, how do we manage our money in between loans, debt, investment, emergency funds, and savings? It's a lot.
Let's take that. Shereen?
I think that's an amazing question, and I think, with unemployment rate being about 50% for grads, that's a very good question. And I think what you have to start doing, at least you have 6 months to start paying back your federal loans, so that's a benefit. So again, that's kind of what I brought up about the cash flow is, before you graduate, know what your expenses are, what your needs are, and what your expected income is. So that's the part about expenses and income and, budgeting based on that. But as far as emergency fund, I mean, you kind of have to do a little bit of everything. And so you may not be able to fully contribute to your retirement plan. What I would say though is for your first 401k, if your employer is matching, put the money in up to the percent that you can match because you're getting free money. So if you can, definitely do that and don't overextend yourself for that, and then have your emergency fund as well. So whatever extra money, I mean, it's definitely a juggling act and there's no way around it because, I have friends that passed the bar a couple years ago and, as attorneys, they're being offered $35,000 as full-time lawyer positions. So the money's not there in a lot of companies. So it's absolutely a balancing act. But that's why I just would constantly reevaluate. Let me give you an idea. I had a client who graduated from physical therapy school. So it's a 6-year degree. Her student loan repayment was about $400 a month, which isn't horrible, actually. But it was over 30 years, okay? So that's a house payment. That's, again, nauseating. So it's kind of looking at what else can you do. We ended up figuring out that she could work an extra Saturday a month, and her loans would be repaid off in 8 years instead of 30. So some of it, it's if your full-time job, if it's not making ends meet, you just got to do what you got to do. Maybe you can do something on the side to really make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. And as I said, it just really depends on how much you're making, and that's why that cash flow is so important, because you can look at where is my money going, what are my needs, what do I need to do to set myself up. So that would be my suggestion for starting out. But 401k, take the free money if you can.
Can you join me in thanking these fine panelists for the even